In your analysis, what are some of the elements that would make your particular lens shine differently on the Ministry of Defence than on other large ministries in the Canadian government?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think it's kind of an empirical question for me. I think what I would want to do is look at comparable organizations, let's say in size or by some other criterion, and just look at the different ways in which they are arrayed on these three areas that I think are important to look at. Numerical representation, the way that employment decision-making is done, and the culture of the organization. Those are the three sort of diagnostic variables that I think are particularly important for purposes of looking at what is the distance we have to go to get to a more equitable kind of organization in terms of how decisions are made and how representation is and how friendly the culture is. I mean, in the Canadian Forces, there's been a recent explosion of information, studies, media reports, although they have been going back 20 years, about sexual harassment, for example. I mean, there's a great big red flag there, and it certainly affects Indigenous women as it does any other women, and is a real caution against, casting your lot with an organization that allows this to carry on. So this is something that I haven't seen in other organizations of comparable size recently, to the extent that I see it in the Canadian Forces. So to me, that's sort of an attention grabber, and I would probably start there with an analysis.
Okay, interesting. I think this is the aspect of using defense for its study itself, but also as a unit of analysis for comparative studies across government. So Joel, I thought really interesting the way you approach the whole debate. I really love the framing you did. Short question, in terms of selecting the people you interviewed, how did you go about to try to have something that's slightly representative in terms of the various racialized type you interviewed?
So it was a very difficult process, I have to say. It's not an easy thing to sort of, one of the things I had to do was really span my criteria. So I really looked at those who are retired, I looked at those in the reserve, and then those that are currently serving. But the interesting thing with currently serving is that there are a lot of hoops to go through with respect to currently serving, unless, of course, it was people that I had known from my networks that wanted to come and speak with me and some did, some really wanted to chat. Others were a little bit more hesitant about that. And again, I was looking, the three places I looked at were Toronto, Ottawa, and Halifax. And it was across, commissioned, non-commissioned. It was across the Army, and the Navy, and the Air Force. And I had a total of about 35 interviews. Once I did 35 interviews with soldiers who identified as racialized, and it would span South Asian soldiers that identified as Caribbean, as Black, some that identified as Asian, whether it was Chinese, Japanese, or whatever the case may be, Filipino. And so it would really span, and I often use StatsCan to help me define the parameters around this as well. My coming to this particular work is also very interesting. I had done work previously with children of military families. So I also had, and I'd also worked at the Downsview base in Toronto, which was formerly the Defense and Civil Institute of Environmental Medicine. So it's not, I was definitely 1 foot in sort of already and engage with people who were having these discussions, and this even casually, so much so that it came to the point that I realized that I need to do some work in this area with these particular soldiers, especially after 9/11. It became intensified for me. And so if you look at some of my work, a lot of these soldiers really decided to join after 9/11. They wanted a sense of purpose. They felt that they could really make a difference. At the same time, that urgency was also for me as well after 9/11 to understand this particular rush around nationalism and the intensification of belonging that took place as well. So the actual recruitment came from a number of places. I had a few people who were interested, and then from there it snowballed in terms of people who knew people, and then it went from there.
I guess one recommendation I would do is to put in place a curriculum like they do in New Zealand, where every soldier is in contact with Aboriginal people. And in my questionnaire, the soldiers were very open to that type of system. So I think it would be very good and useful that every soldier had a contact with Aboriginal people to know this culture, and to be able to work with them, especially with the rangers. I think every soldier would love the experience. And if it's not going on operation in North because it's pretty expensive, then just putting some information in the BMQ, like in the basic military course, related to Aboriginal. I think it would be costless, and I think it would do a good difference.